Are you tired of all the confusion out there about environmental issues? Then tune into Joe DeMar and For a Green Future every Sunday at 8 a.m. on ESPN 1065, The Ticket. Let's face it, there's a lot of disinformation out there about the environment. We'll talk about things like global warming, fracking, and clean energy. Tune in every week. Joe DeMar is getting to the truth on environmental issues on For a Green Future, Sundays at 8 a.m. on ESPN 1065, The Ticket. This is Joe DeMar, and for the next hour I'm going to be your host here on For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment and the issues that affect you and your families personally. My name is Joe DeMar, and I am the political director of the Ohio Green Party, but on this show I am not speaking for the Green Party. I'm speaking only for myself, as are all my guests. And we're hoping for some pretty good guests today. I have some people calling in that are very interesting and should have some good questions. And, of course, you can call in. This is a live call-in show, and the number is 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. This is the best radio show in the Toledo area, but it gets better every time you call. So those of you who were listening last week, do know that I'm from Western New York, and here we are. We're beginning our third week of the actual icy weather of winter. I know it seems like longer, but really it's only been 2 weeks so far. We're going to have another cold week this week, according to the weather, but then week after that we should be back up above freezing. I just wanted to repeat a little bit of advice that I gave last week, and that is don't rely solely on your brakes in this weather. Don't rush up to the intersection and then hit your brakes, because it's likely you're not going to stop. You have to start easing on the brakes, sometimes a whole block before the intersection. And remember, other people might not know this, so when you're coming up to an intersection, remember that somebody else could be speeding through or slipping and sliding right through it, even if you've got the green light. Just a little bit of defensive driving. Oh, also, if you have to get up when it's dark in the morning, the way I did this morning, don't forget to clean off your headlights. We often worry about the windshields, but it's important to clean off those headlights too. One other thing happened to me on the drive in this morning that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and that is I had to get gas. And I stopped at the gas station, and I admit I got a little bit of a discount because I stopped at a store where I have a card, but I paid $1.65 for gas this morning. And that's, we're all like, oh, that's wonderful, more money in my pocket, etc. But it's also a little crazy. Gas is so incredibly cheap right now. And part of the reason is that the government, our tax dollars, we subsidize gas. We give money to companies like Exxon and to help them pay for exploration. And we give them our oil and our gas that are on our national forest lands and our public lands for practically nothing, for just a few token pennies. Literally, a company might end up paying a few $dozen to take out thousands of gallons of oil or millions of cubic feet of natural gas from public lands. So, when you hear the people who don't want us to get off fossil fuels, when you hear them say, oh, solar can't compete and wind can't compete in the open marketplace, just remember, they don't have an open marketplace. They are getting subsidized like crazy, and that's the only way they can bring gasoline to you at $1.65 a gallon. So if we really had a true market economy where things actually competed against each other, wind and solar would beat gas and oil like that, because obviously if you don't have to pay fuel costs, your energy costs are going to be even cheaper. And, if we had tons of wind and solar, we could do things like make hydrogen with it and be fueling our cars with hydrogen. And we could have electric cars, and we could have hybrid cars, and we wouldn't one of the points of For a Green Future is that switching over to a sustainable economy, one that won't destroy the planet, does not have to be uncomfortable. It doesn't have to hurt our lifestyles. In fact, it'll improve our lifestyles. There'll be less sickness. People will have more money. They'll be able to do more things with their lives because we're not polluting ourselves and destroying the environment with this incredibly cheap $1.65 a gallon oil and gas. So a little bit of an intro there. Just something I had to get off my chest because I was coming in, and I have the mic. And when I have the mic, and I think, somebody should say something about this, I get to. It's wonderful. I love this show. And you'll get to say something too. And I'm going to open up the phones at about 8:15. 866-240-1065 will be the number. As I said, we've got some guests coming up, and we have, once again, we have the letter from the future. My great-great-granddaughter, Marie I., wonderful woman, sent me another letter this morning, and it just, there's this flash of photons, and right there on the bed, on the bedstand right next to my bed, a letter appears every Sunday morning. It's amazing. So we've got the letter from Marie I. coming up. We got some great callers, and I wanted to mention some of the ways to get in touch with us outside of the radio show. We are now a full-fledged podcast. This show will be rebroadcast. It'll be available on iTunes. You look for a Green Future, and we pop right up. The podcast is hosted on a podcasting company called Podomatic, and so you just look for podomatic.com/podcast/for-a-green-future, and you'll see us there. We're also on YouTube, and so on YouTube, you just look up For a Green Future, and once again, we're up there. The first 3 episodes are all up there, and on the YouTube video, I put little supplements. I put little extra things, little visuals that supplement what we're saying here on the radio. For example, when we were talking about all the radioactive nuclides that are produced in nuclear power, I have in the YouTube video, you'll see an actual list of them right up there. And when I talk about a sponsor here on the show, you can look at the YouTube video, and the contact information for that sponsor will be there. So if you say, oh, hey, I do want to call DeMar Computer Consulting and get my computer looked at, go to the YouTube video, and the phone number and an email address are repeated right there. So, we're coming along. This is only the 4th week, and we're already a podcast. We've got a YouTube channel. We're getting lots of interest. And on the Podomatic, when I first put the podcast up, we were rated 37,154th. Now we're up to 66 because people have been listening to the podcast and downloading it, and we've been moving up there. If we get up into the top 20, our podcast will appear on the front page of the Podomatic podcast hosting site. So please download it. Tell friends to download it. Help us bump up there into that top 20. And thanks very much for the attention that's gotten us from 37,000th to 66th. I'm psyched about that. One thing that it's not terribly easy to get psyched about right now is winter, is the cold. But on today's show, I want to talk a little bit about the ecological and environmental benefits of winter, of extreme cold. And it's something to comfort ourselves with as we're bundled up or huddled on our couch with our blanket and our hot cocoa. Winter is really a wonderful thing, ecologically speaking. It protects us from a lot of harm, and it's really cool. So I just wanted to make everybody feel a little bit better this morning, and we're talking about the ecological benefits of winter. And one of them is our trees. Around here we have lots of birch and maple trees. They're really beautiful trees, and as you know, maple trees give us maple syrup, and they depend on really cold winters. They depend on there actually being snow on the ground. Having ground that's covered with snow changes things like the way that the ground holds moisture, and birches and maples and other trees of that kind need that sort of a soil in order to survive. If they don't get it, they die out. And unfortunately, I was looking on the EPA's website. They have a map there that says that by 2070, they expect most of the maples and birches around here to die out. They expect it to be replaced with things like cottonwood. And unfortunately, they made this prediction several years back, and a cottonwood ash tree kind of forest. I say unfortunately because, as most of you probably know, we no longer have ash trees. We had the emerald ash borer came in from China and wiped them out. So we're looking at forests that are made up primarily of trees like cottonwoods. I think that's terrible. I think that I love maples and birches, and I love the way they look in the fall. I love maple syrup. I love birch trees and birch bark. I don't know if any of you ever go camping and have to start campfires. The wonders of birch bark are just incredible. The way, if you take a little bit of birch bark and you light it, it makes the best fire starter because it's full of oil. And so if you have a little bundle of birch bark, you can get the wettest wood burning with just one match. It's sort of a Boy Scout secret there. But it's not just the trees. It's not just something to look at and eat. It's also, winter protects us from a lot of diseases. There are things growing down there in the south that we do not want growing in or on us. And having these nice cold winters drives them back, keeps them down in the subtropical and tropical areas. And I'm talking about things like malaria and things like sleeping sickness that's carried by the tsetse fly. And you might say to me, tsetse flies, Joe, this is North America. This isn't Africa. But I say, if we've learned nothing else over the last 100 or 200 years, it's that species can jump from continent to continent if we carry them. They hop aboard, our transports. They hop aboard our, like the emerald ash borers that have destroyed our forests, ash trees. Those came over on a pallet from China. So, everybody talks about how wonderful global trade is, but nobody factors in the loss of our natural resources. One of the ones that I still miss, are the chestnut trees. Very similar situation. A disease from Europe came over and destroyed the chestnut tree. Chestnuts used to be the most popular or the most prevalent tree in the Northeast forests. A lot of people don't know that anymore, but settlement of North America would have been impossible without the chestnut tree, because you could literally go and take a bushel basket into any stand of woods and come out with a week's worth of protein and carbohydrates, because chestnuts are very high in protein and carbohydrates. You could come out with a week's worth of food for a few hours of just picking chestnuts up off the ground. And without that support from the natural ecosystems, all our little colonies all over up and down the East Coast, that we talk about how hard the pioneers were working and so forth. That's true, but they couldn't have done it without the chestnut tree. And then we brought in some wood, some infected wood from Europe, and now they're almost extinct. They're not quite extinct, and there are efforts to bring them back, and we can talk about that on a future show. But we're back to diseases now. There's a whole bunch of parasites and pests that we're protected from. For example, hookworm. That's a terrible problem down in the south. Hookworm is a parasite that if you walk in bare feet on the ground, or if your skin comes in contact with the ground and there's hookworm eggs in there, it's a parasite that'll get into your skin and then get into your body and into your intestines. And people with hookworm are very slow. They don't have much energy. They're not very healthy. It's not a disease you want to get. And so we're safe from hookworm up here because it's so snowy and cold right now. So that might give you a little bit of comfort. These snowbanks are actually defenses against some of these terrible parasites. And another terrible pest we're protected from are fire ants. Fire ants are terrible. I've never had a fire ant bite, but I've heard it described as one of the most painful things that can happen to a human being. There's a fire ant bite because they inject formic acid when they bite you. And we're safe. We're safe because we're behind the cold barrier. It protects us. And it also enables us to have other things that we do like. For example, the walleye run. Walleye need this cold weather. They need the rivers to be frozen over and then warm up. And in fact, the southernmost range of the walleye are northern Georgia. And, if you go below northern Georgia, the climate's just too warm. So if you're somebody who likes to fish, if you're somebody who likes to get out there and with waders and, you're out in the frigid Maumee River, you couldn't do that without this cold weather that we're having right now. The walleye would be gone. And that, since we're on WTOD, the ticket, 106.5, that opens up the whole range, the whole wealth of winter sports. Things like hockey. Historically, hockey was something you could just play on any, pond that was in your neighborhood. You didn't have to have a skating rink to play hockey. It developed, people just would push the snow off the ice. You'd get your ice skates. You'd go out there. My wife used to skate around on ponds right in this very neighborhood where our offices are here on Arlington Avenue. There are some ponds right out here near where the hospitals are. And as a kid, she was just on a typical snowy winter day, maybe in December even. Maybe she didn't have to wait to the middle of January for ice, but she could just go with her friends and they'd ice skate and they'd spend a morning just skating around on the ice. So we've got walleye fishing, we've got ice skating, there's skiing, of course. Why don't you call? We're going to open up the lines very shortly here, 866-240-1065, 866-240-1065. What's your favorite winter sport? Your favorite winter experience? And we could talk a little bit about that before we get on to our guests or the letter from the future. One other interesting thing I found in researching this is that when you're out in the cold, and now you have to actually go outside to get this benefit, but when you do any sort of exercise in the cold, you get something like twice the benefit from it, because if you're running or walking in the cold, your body ramps up its metabolism. It's like, oh man, it's cold, so everything gets a better workout in the cold. So if you're trying to lose those pounds that you gained back at Christmas time, I have to admit I did, take a walk or two out in the cold, or even maybe try some cross-country skiing, and you'll find that there's benefits right away. So you don't have to worry about. You don't have to work as hard to get as much benefit, so you can get fitter quicker. So there's a big benefit. Another thing that I found when I was researching this is that we actually think better in the cold. There have been a number of psychological studies where they took people and put them in warmer environments or colder environments than the ones they were used to, and they perform better on intelligence tests and things that need thinking. So if you have to make some big decision, maybe you and your spouse or your significant other are trying to decide, some big life decision, get together, get your coats on, go outside to talk about it in this weather, and you'll find you can think more clearly and you can make better decisions in the cold. That's been proven psychologically. So there's all kinds of benefits from the cold, and I hope that our little talk about it helped you out a little bit. There's, and having winter, it might seem unpleasant now, but really it's a wonderful thing. But you just have to get out in it to get all the benefits from it. And so, speaking of jumping into it, I believe we have a caller. Let's go to the lines. 866-240-1065, 866-240-1065. Okay, caller, go ahead.
Hi, Joe?
Hello, yes.
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, I was just relating strongly to what you said about there being things in the South which it's kind of nice in some ways not to have in the North. I grew up in four different states because my parents were Midwestern faculty brat. Somebody got another degree and we had to move again every 3-4 years. So when I was living in Western Kentucky, there were fleas. Even people who didn't have pets had fleas in their house. There were giant slugs, poisonous snakes, and ticks. And I moved here. Let's see, we moved back up here to Bowling Green in I think 79 or late 78. It was what people terrorized us, with the story of the blizzard. But then that didn't happen again for a long time, so that was good. But we just missed that. We moved here right after the blizzard. But it took me several years at the age of 12 to get used to walking through fields of tall grass, because you really didn't want to do that in Kentucky, or you want to be very careful because you were going to have to check yourself very closely for ticks, and you always had to keep an eye on the ground for whatever it was, copperheads or something. And that was then you have winter, which winter is not always a rockin' good time, but at least not the other stuff. So that was good.
Yeah, and you kind of bring up another thing about winter I wanted to mention, and that was that people tend to help each other a little more, I think, in the winter time. I was thinking the blizzard of 78 that you mentioned. One of the things I remember most vividly about that are the stories of just incredible altruism. The way people helped each other out in that terrible blizzard. They let people come into their homes. They went and checked on the elderlies in their neighborhood. And I think that the winter weather brings us together in a way that, hot weather kind of wants you to keep a little distance from each other. So,
because we all want to stay in the shade, yeah.
Right.
And not move, right? Yeah, when we lived in Kentucky, my father had to help people when it snowed because they did not know how to drive, and no one could get out of the parking lot because people would get stalled at a certain point and not be able to get through the snowdrift. So it led to helping right there, too. Right,
yeah, and pushing each other out of snowbanks, that's a kind of I'm originally from Buffalo, and that's just something you're going to expect to do a couple times every winter. You're going to have to push somebody out of the snow, and and you always keep in mind that actually that somebody might be you because nobody's a perfect driver. So
there we go, team sports. It is.
Yeah, team sports, exactly, and winter sports. So, all right, well, Rebecca, thank you very much for the call. That was a great call.
Yes, thank you.
All right, have a good day, and we actually already have another caller on the line. And this is a caller who I was hoping would call in because, hello. Carrie, are you on the line?
Hello, Joseph Kumar. It's a pleasure to be on WTOD 106.5 FM. They call it the ticket, right?
Right. It is a pleasure, isn't it? I love being on this show. I love having the mic. I love being able to talk to people about these issues. And I want to assure everybody that don't worry, the sports are on their way. The Cheap Seats is the next show coming up at 9 o'clock, and you will again be hearing some sports talk. But right now we're having some ecology and some environment, just a little something to clear the palate and maybe get you some information that you didn't have. Now, the reason I asked Carrie to call in this week is because of our show last week. Last week we were talking about the carbon zero house, and that is houses that are so ecologically and so energy efficient and conscious that they don't actually net put carbon into the air. Now, Carrie, I understand that you actually have some carbon negative houses.
That's right, Joe. And we first started working on this, installing what we needed for our houses about 10 years ago. And this is because of my green background. About 40 years ago, I was stationed in the U.S. Air Force in Germany. I met the Green Party founder, Peter Kelly.
Wow.
And since those days, I've been a Green.
I didn't know that. Petra Kelly is one of my personal heroes, and you better. Wow. I got goosebumps.
I knew Peter Kelly rather well. Jürgen Trittin, all these Green Party founders, Major General Gerd Bastian, of course, all those people in the late 70s is when the Green Party started. I, by the way, heard your previous guest mention Kentucky, and of course, many of us. My family's from Eastern Kentucky, so many of us in that corridor from Cincinnati all the way up to Detroit, because of the migration there, have Kentucky roots or Appalachian roots. And of course, that is being part of nature, and that's part of the natural appeal of green ideas and a zero carbon home. Some call it a passive house, but what it really means is you produce more energy in your house than you consume. And the first key step to that, anybody who'd like to do that, is in the house, what we looked at was cutting our consumption of energy. And so we went around and looked in the house to see if we had Frankenstein devices. These are those little clock radios that run all night, or those blinking lights on the oven that blink all the time. And we tried to get rid of all of those things in the house. The second step that we looked at that was very inexpensive and anybody can do to cut their energy use in their house was insulation. And fortunately, I have a house to share, and I got a buddy who's in construction, and he had the inexpensive access to insulation, and he had the technical skills on how to put the insulation into the roof and into the walls of the house. And so that was the second step for cutting our energy consumption and getting us to a net zero house. The next thing was putting in new windows. And, is it okay, Joe, I went to a local provider, a local company, had the windows installed, and that immediately made a big difference. Now, the average U.S. house today, in 2019, is about 2,600 square feet. My houses, we have three, are much smaller houses. The first house where we put the solar, the geothermal insulation in, is a 1,500 square foot house. Built 1958, standard, split level. So thereafter, the insulation, the new windows, we got rid of the Frankenstein devices.
I think, Carrie, I think those are usually called vampire walls.
Vampire devices.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, there's because of the idea that they're sucking power out all the time, even when they're not in use. But Frankenstein also applies, I think.
Vampire, that's right.
Yeah.
I was trying. Bela Lugosi for my generation. And so then we put in the solar panels. So the first, I want to back up just to putting in the geothermal heating and cooling. We immediately noticed after we had the geothermal heating and cooling put in that it cut our energy consumption by 2/3.
Wow.
So very good. And of course, what was appealing to me, and this would be to any husband, when my wife walked into the house after the geothermal was installed, she said, "Oh, I like this. The air was completely different." And so that was a big success. And then we put in the 51 solar panels next. And of course, since it was our first solar experience, we monitored the energy use every day very closely. And we found that the house was producing 10 times the energy it consumes. Now, an average U.S. house consumes about 10 kilowatts of energy. We had our house down to about 6-7 kilowatts by the time we got the solar installed. And so,
and how much solar did you install?
51 solar panels. We installed 51 solar panels, and that was all of this process. I started researching on it years ago, of course, being a Green Party guy since the 70s, but got very serious about my research about 15 years ago and saved the money to make the purchases. And then over a space of 3 years, finally got to the solar panels along with the geothermal. And that was, of course, a great and positive experience, and not only a moneymaker, but a planet saver. One example, I was just talking with I'm on my Civic Association board in North Springfield, Virginia, and was talking to a neighbor about installing the solar panels. And she said, well, I have 3 trees that I'm very worried about taking down. And like most folks, when you've lived in a house for a place, you're attached to your trees. It makes sense. You know, your trees grow up with your family. And I had the same concern, but once I saw that the solar that we installed was the equivalent of planting 10,000 trees, then I felt, even as a Southern Baptist, a little guilt-free about taking those trees down and going ahead and putting in the solar. Of course, so it's been a real money maker.
Yeah, let's go back to that money maker. Now, are you talking just the money that you've saved over the years on electricity and heating, or are you actually talking making money?
Yes and yes. I'm an accountant, and Campbell's the last name, so it's a Scottish heritage, and so therefore I can say that the cliche about us, folks of Scottish heritage, being very frugal is very true, at least for me. And so I have watched the money very carefully. So based on my calculation, the moment that we put in the solar, it paid for itself. It increased the value of the house by $22,000. We got the federal tax credit of 30%. So that means, I'm going to use rounded numbers here. If you put in $100 worth of solar, when you do your federal taxes, you get $30 of that back. So it's, or you can, run those numbers up. $100,000, you get $30,000 back.
Well, that's that's nothing to sneeze at there.
Nothing to sneeze at. And the other thing at the time in Virginia, we had state grants. So I received several $1,000s in state grants. So the minute that we put the solar, and these applied at that time also to geothermal energy. And so when we put those in, we were ahead of the game from the get-go. In other words, all the money we had invested, we had recouped from the start. Now, also you receive, every state is a bit different, so you want to go online to look at the specific rules for your state, whether you're in Ohio or whether you're in Michigan, Virginia, or Washington, D.C. We have 3 houses, one's in Washington, D.C., and 2 in Virginia, and so therefore we know that the difference in those rules. It also shows the important role of politics and in play in having a very active group of Greens in each state. Where you find that you have a more active group of Greens, you find that you make more money with your solar because of what's called solar renewable energy tax credits. And these are tax credits that the companies pay for a reduction of their tax bill for the use of solar. And as a home solar owner, you make money from that. Now, last year, I received quarterly checks, and last year I received around $4,000 for the entire year in those checks. And of course,
I just want to point out that you can't get that kind of return on investment on any sort of stock or bond or savings account. I mean, it looks like you your own home has become a revenue source for you instead of just a drain on your finances. That's amazing.
That's exactly how I see it. As a small little individual, my house is an energy company, and so it's really worked out great for us. And the other point to make about that money coming in is, it's going to come in for the next 30 years. I mean, let's see if we stay at that rate. Now, there are different ways of the way that you can write contracts and receive that money, but we stay with the market. And if the market goes up or down, the amount of money fluctuates. But $4,000 times 30 years, $120,000, right? So it's a moneymaker.
Well, that's great, and I'd much rather get energy from the Chris Energy Company than First Energy, given the way First Energy is relying on nuclear and so forth. Wow, well, that's great. And I have one more question for you, Chris.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Could you talk about your home now in terms of comfort? I mean, you said your house is a little smaller. Do you consider your house like cramped? And what about the heating and cooling? Is your house like colder in this weather? I don't know what the weather is in Virginia right now. Maybe you could tell us.
We're around 30 degrees. And absolutely not. It's a standard 1,500 square feet. That house is specifically, and all three of our houses about the same size.
Okay.
3 bedrooms, four bedrooms in the house and 2 bathrooms in the house. So
that sounds pretty comfortable.
And since we produce so much energy from the solar and the geothermal energy, and 10 times the energy production of what the house consumes made us as a family be less frugal about our energy use. So we don't worry about the heat in the winter. My 91-year-old Aunt Ida lives with us, and she likes to say, I freeze in July. So Aunt Ida likes the heat way up in the winter and the cool in the summer. So we listen to Aunt Ida. And so it's just as warm and balmy as you want it to be in the winter, and just as cool and refreshing as you like it to be in the summer. And there's been our third installation on our third house. I refer to it as my wife's house. Was just on December 26th. And another key point I'd like to make for you, Joe DeMar, is we started out very specifically as green folks. We were very aware of the corporate element versus local business or regional business. So we chose a regional solar company to install our first solar system on our first house. On our second house, we chose a very local, small business solar company startup to install that solar system. And by that time, only 4 years ago, the solar panel production went way up. So instead of installing 50 solar panels, we installed 27, and we get the same amount of production out of those 27 solar panels, just slightly less than we do out of the 51 on the other house. And they have continued the solar panels in their production have continued to climb. Just this December, we installed Tesla solar panels, and these Tesla solar power walls on my wife's house. And that is the new element that is really nice with these power walls. Came out in 2015. This is the latest version of them, and they will store 13.5 kilowatts per power wall. Now, as I mentioned, the average family consumes about 10 kilowatts. So we're storing in one power wall more electricity, twice the electricity that we would use in a day.
Wow.
We got 2 power walls because we wanted extra backup. So now we never again will need to use the electric company's electric. We will always have more electric than we need. We are still plugged in. It's a thing they call it net metering, and that's allowed here in Virginia. You want to try it, check in Ohio and see.
Yeah, we do have net metering in Ohio, although the Republicans were trying to get rid of it, but they haven't been able to. But, yeah.
And, of course, you talked about WTOD is a sports channel, and the greatest sports game. I'm an old basketball guy, and an old football guy, and a high jumper, and a track guy. So I love sports, and politics in America is one of the great sports, and the green zero energy that we're talking about is also a game of foot. And the great sporting game of foot in America today is green renewable energies for your home, whereas I'm trying to illustrate here, you can make money versus the big old fossil fuel companies that are still doing well for some stockholders, that's for sure. But that game, that competition between the new renewable energy, the green energy for your home, and our grandpa's source of energy is a great game that's afoot now.
All right. Well, and we're happy to be on the right side of that competition, Kerry. Thank you so much for calling.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great call and supporting what we did on last week's show. So you've actually done it. It's possible, and it's not that hard. It just takes some planning. Well, thanks, Kerry. We got to move on. Unfortunately, we only have 1 hour here, and we actually have another caller. And I wanted to remind everyone that they can call in to 866-240-1065, 866-240-1065. Give us your favorite winter memory, skating, sledding, something to help us get through this little cold snap we're in. But you can call and ask on any ecological or environmental question. We welcome questions on any topic related to the environment. And we have Chris on the line. And Chris, I think you wanted to talk about something along those lines, something a little different.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing, Chris?
Oh, I'm kind of hectic. I got to get to work here in a few minutes. But you asked me to call in and talk about the relationship between cannabis and the environment.
Okay, go for it.
Well, the simple truth is that that pot is good for the environment.
Okay, how so?
Well, first of all, let's take a look at pot as food. The dietary amino acids and fatty omega acids in for cannabis when consumed raw, or if you're a vegetarian, without you get criticized for eating a diet that is weak in certain amino acids. The amino acids and fatty acids that they're referring to are actually found in the cannabis plant. If you add cannabis to your diet, boom, and you're a vegetarian, you have a complete diet now. The restorative qualities of cannabis in the soil itself are very powerful. The way it works with soil chemistry is that it tends to replace nitrogen and make whatever goes into that ground suitable for growing the next cycle. And, of course, the energy savings from a cannabis-based economy are significant compared to the investments required on a more conventional cash crop, which requires fertilizers and so forth and so on.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying cannabis is good for the ground. It's good for
the ground. It's good for the body. It's good, and it's good for the environment in general because of its non-polluting system.
Is cannabis actually native to North America?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that was here before the settlers came.
That was here before the settlers. It's been here since actually it's found on all 7 continents, including Australia, South America, North America, Asia, Europe, Africa, and there are slightly different strains that are found in all of the different continents as well. A recently discovered version called cannabis russia has been recently discovered in Siberia.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. So,
evidence furthermore to indicate that cannabis consisted of a significant portion of early human diet. Inky the Iceman, the famous frozen mummy that was found in northern Europe a while back and was reported to be the oldest whole intact human corpse that we are aware of, was reportedly wearing a pouch at his belt, and it carried a little bag of weed.
Oh, that's kind of amazing. I did not know that. Huh. So you think that all these programs that pretty much every state has, that if they find it growing wild somewhere, they send out helicopters and spray herbicides and destroy it. You would say that's like a waste of money then? Oh,
absolutely. Not only is it a waste of money on the part of the state for indulging in such expense, but it's a ruinous effect on the environment. You spray that herbicide down there, and not only do you kill the pot plant, but you kill the grass around it.
Okay, well, so I appreciate your call, Chris, and thanks for enlightening us a little bit about cannabis and its place, its proper place in the environment.
Right. Well, the whole thing about cannabis, it's all just kind of a myth, I mean, the stuff was outlawed at the end of Prohibition, and the reason why it was outlawed when it was outlawed is because at the end of Prohibition there were a whole bunch of liquor cops who were about to get laid off, treasury agents or revenuers, if you ever read the old Snuffy Smith comic strip. And these guys, with no prohibition, there was no need for them, right? Well, so it's the Great Depression, these guys get laid off, and now we invent a new prohibition against cannabis to keep them on the job so they're not laying off policemen during the Great Depression. That's how all this started.
Well, and it certainly has helped a lot of prison companies. There's a lot of people in jail for crime of smoking marijuana. Yeah.
It helps the prison companies. It helps the cops. It does not help the average citizen whatsoever.
Well, I think the Green Party. Well, and my personal position is decriminalization, and I thanks for calling in, Chris. Go ahead.
All right. I'm not even sure that decrim really works because I live in Ohio where they have decrim, and all decrim means in Ohio is that the little guy who has less than a quarter pound gets a fine, and the guy who has more than a quarter pound gets sent to prison. That's how decrim works in Ohio.
I see.
Ohio's been decrim since.
So what would you advocate? What's your position?
My position is actually the simplest and easiest one of them all. Abolish all the pot laws. There is no such thing as a good pot law, and that goes to include legalization, because when you look at it, legalization is just another rewriting of the pot laws. When they legalize something, you have to write a law to give it a special status under law. That's the meaning of legalize. And there's no such thing as a good pot law that includes legalization. We should abolish all the pot laws now and treat it no differently than we would parsley, sage, rosemary, or thyme. This means that it would be treated just like any other medicinal herb that you can buy in the health food store and would be regulated probably under the auspices of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, DSHEA, passed by Orrin Hatch, which told the health food stores that the FDA was not able to interfere with their actions.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm afraid I have to get going. I have a few more things to do before the hour ends, but thank you very much for your insights and your comments, and we'll do a whole show on this in the future.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and you have a good day.
You too. Bye. All right. Well, that was Chris. You could call in too at 866-240-1065. We've only got a few minutes left of the show before the cheap seats open up and we're back to sports. But in those few minutes, there's some important things I need to do. One of them is talk about our sponsors. our show is sponsored by DeMar Consulting. DeMar Consulting is a company that does home visits. They'll come out and help you with your consulting with your computer problems. They will do backups of your computers. They'll install new software for you. They'll show you how to use new software. If you've got some sort of problem, they'll help you diagnose it. You don't have to disconnect your computer and bring it in anywhere. DeMar Computer Consulting will come out to you. One good service they provide is backing up. So, for example, if you've bought a new laptop and you want to take the stuff off your old laptop and put it onto your new laptop, DeMar Computer will come out to your home and do that for you. The website is demarconsulting.com. That's spelled DEMARE, and then the word consulting with no spaces or dashes, demarconsulting.com. And the phone number is 419-973-3000. So give DeMar Consulting a call, get them out there to fix your computer problems, and I think you won't be sorry. So there's our sponsor for this hour, and now let's go up back on. I wanted to give you guys some updates on some things that are going on. One of them is the Trump administration somehow, even though he shut down the government, he's still managing to make some bad policies here. After the Fukushima disaster, the U.S. nuclear regulatory apparatus, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, proposed some rules to prevent the Fukushima disaster from happening here. And some of those rules were very specific to what happened at Fukushima, where there was an earthquake, and then that was followed by a tsunami, and that caused flooding. And the flooding is what caused the generators to fail and the meltdowns and the disaster. So NRC looked at their accident the way they're supposed to and said, we're not going to have that happen here. Here's some new rules about flooding that all nuclear power plants have to follow. Well, Trump, in his finite wisdom, his administration is proposing new rules. Well, they're proposing to get rid of those new rules. And he said, it's just too much trouble. Flooding, another meltdown, So even though, very specifically we learned that if you want to prevent your nuke plants from melting down, you have to take these measures against flooding, the Trump administration is just saying, not so much, just forget about it, in order to save the company some money. And we also have talked about the fact that supposedly Davis-Besse is slated to be closed. Well, and I suggested that way back in our first show that this was just a tactic, that what First Energy really wants is they want to be able to raise your electric bill infinitely in order to pay for the tremendous repairs that Davis-Besse needs. It's got a cracked containment dome. It's an old plant. Pipes are leaking. Tritium is leaking into the ground. They need literally tens of billions of dollars to get that plant back up into operational condition. It should not be operating now. In fact, they just had a shutdown last weekend because something failed with the generator. They're back up again, but every minute they're running, we are all at risk. So they said, we're going to shut the plant down. But then what they've gone and done is they've gone and created a fake citizens group. It's something called the Ohio Clean Energy Jobs Alliance. And they are taking out ads all over the place. They're on Facebook. And what they're saying is that we've got to keep it open. We've got to pressure our legislators to allow us to do this infinite rate increase in order to keep our plants open and save these jobs. Well, the fact that this is a citizens group, quote unquote, started by a company, was very clear. I saw a Facebook ad for them, and the ad now with the new Facebook rules, you have to say who pays for the ads, and the ads for the Ohio Clean Energy Alliance are actually paid for by the First Energy Solutions company. So a citizens group, which is having its advertising paid for by a corporation, and who, if the quote-unquote citizens group gets their way, the corporation gets to raise your utility rates, quadruple, triple, quintuple, whatever it takes to pay for the plant. That is what we call astroturf. That is fake democracy, and that's happening right now. So your legislators need to hear from you, from actual citizens who really have an actual opinion and aren't being paid to take positions. They need to hear from you that you don't want your utility rates to go quadruple and quintuple in order to pay for this aging nuclear plant. Not when we can have jobs. We can have more jobs if we're putting in wind and solar and geothermal. More jobs, better jobs, jobs that don't expose workers to radiation and don't cause them cancer, give their children birth defects. That's what we want for a green future, not this horrible, horrible nuclear power. And speaking of the horrible effects of nuclear power, I have a letter here from my great-great-granddaughter, Marie I., and she is up in the Kola Peninsula, which is in the northernmost parts of Russia up there. And she's working on a project to get rid of the nuclear waste that we're generating now. Back in the year 2299, they're going to be injecting it into the ground. So she sent me a letter, and here it is. Greetings from the year 2099. It was past week, it's been 20 degrees below zero here, but it's been so clear and cold, the humidity is low. Even though it's 20 below zero, it's actually feels warm in the sun. Isn't that interesting? A lot happens here. A lot is happening here on the Kola Peninsula. The first shipment of radioactive waste from your time has arrived by train yesterday. This is a small shipment, really just to practice for the millions of tons that will be coming. Billions of people watched the unloading. About 1 billion of the 2 billion people on Earth now watched it live. More watched it later. People in your future all understand how important safely disposing of these nuclear wastes are. Unfortunately, there were a couple of disasters in your time that made it clear to everyone. I can't tell you what they were because that would upset the future, but I'm really sad when I think about some of the things the people of your time are about to go through. But that's partly why I'm so proud to be part of this project, to make sure no one suffers from radiation damage again. You know I'm a bacteriologist. My job is to make sure that the waste we are going to inject deep into the earth isn't going to upset the ecological balance of the bacteria that live there. I love bacteria. They're so clever in coping with their environment. In your time, you already know about the bacteria Deinonychus radiodurans. That bacteria actually has 2 sets of DNA so that it can repair itself from radiation damage. Now we know about lots of other bacteria with other defenses. But all of these bacteria have defenses. Radiation isn't good for any organism. I can't believe that the guy who calls himself president in your time actually proposed rules saying that radiation is supposed to be good for you. They learned that wasn't true in the early 1900s. Anyway, your great-great-great-grandson Matt, who's living on Mars, says hi. And I actually met a nice guy that I'm going to tell you more about in my next letter. It looks like we might be hitting it off. Thanks for reading my letter, Grandpa, great-great-grandpa, and I will see you in the future. Marie I. So, isn't that a nice letter from my great-great-granddaughter? I'm so proud of her, or I will be. So anyway, that's our show. We've run out of time. I didn't actually get to cover everything I wanted, so I've got more stuff for next week. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a wonderful experience, and I love being able to talk to you about ecological and environmental issues. Thanks so much, and goodbye.